I have had enough. For 2 decades, I have been living with the weight of such a horrendous miscarriage of justice on my shoulders, and today is the day I put an end to it. Maybe if I lived in some subpar dysfunctional nation like Sweden or Denmark or God fucking forbid Canada, I would stick my head in the sand and go on with my life. But I am a citizen of the US of motherfucking a nation that holds its media to the highest of journalistic standards, where our honorable leaders take care of us in our darkest hour, where any clear act of foul play is not swept under the rug, but pursued until the truth is revealed. And thus, I consider it my patriotic duty to announce for all to hear, regardless of the repercussions for me or my channel, yes, Kevin McCallister orchestrated 9/11. In order to properly set the stage, it would be advisable to begin with a detailed rundown of the ongoings in the Middle East from the 1980s up until the early 1990s, specifically the conflict between the Mujahideen forces of Afghanistan and the Soviet armed forces known as the Soviet-Afghan War, as well as Operation Cyclone, which was a coordinated effort by the Central Intelligence Agency to finance the Mujahideen's counter-assault on the Soviets. However, the Wikipedia entry on said conflict is quite long and is sort of wordy, with a lot of socio-political context and nuance and shit. I just skimmed it and got the main points. Something, communism, whatever. Anyway, let's start with the events that took place in the winter of 1990 in the Chicago suburb of Winnetka, Illinois. As while the most damning evidence against our subject takes place a year later in the city of New York, these events allow us to understand how Kevin was able to be recruited as a lone wolf operative. Specifically, we must begin with Kevin's father, Peter McCallister, and proceed to answer one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries of the last century. Namely, how in the ever-loving fuck did the McCallisters afford their insanely lucrative lifestyle? While Mother Kate is said to be a fashion designer, Peter's profession is never stated, though as a result of my sound and thorough analysis and investigation, it is clear to me that both Peter and his elusive brother Rob are money launderers for some seedy and wealthy individuals, most likely Osama bin Laden himself, to help fund his newly formed multinational organization known as Al-Qaeda. The evidence is clear in how the brothers situated themselves geographically. Peter is just outside of Chicago, and Rob owns houses in both New York and Paris, all large central metropolitan areas in either the United States or Europe, France itself bordering the nation of Switzerland. The most damning piece of evidence can be found in the following year when the McCallisters inconceivably decided to spend their holiday in Miami, Florida.
Who wants to spend Christmas in a tropical climate anyway?
Someone who funnels funds to finance global terrorist cells across the globe via offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. That's who. But that leaves the question as to how Kevin was recruited by Al-Qaeda, as surely his father wouldn't have wanted his son to get involved in his affairs. Well, that brings us to Old Man Marley, who under threat of his granddaughter being harmed, was forced to keep tabs on Peter, ensuring he didn't try to pull any shit. And that is when he informed his handlers of Kevin McCallister and his potential as a sleeper agent. Looking back, the signs are obvious. Kevin is shown to be the outcast of his family, expressing great disdain for them as a whole. He commits acts of petty larceny, seems to be drawn to violent films, and is shown to have aggressive tendencies. There is even evidence to suggest that Kevin's indoctrination had begun before the events of that Christmas. Kevin is seen to be a fan of plain cheese pizza. As much of a general red flag as that is in and of itself, Kevin also states he is not a fan of sausage, presumably due to the fact that sausage found in the US is often made with ground pork meat, and thus in violation of Islamic dietary law. Kevin is shown to be quite resourceful, experienced with firearms, and adept at various tactics of guerrilla warfare, many of which appear to be reminiscent of those found in a manual used by the CIA to train Nicaraguan Contras to wage war against their Marxist government throughout the 1980s. It is also possible that Al-Qaeda has been using methods developed by the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control experimentation, methods the CIA may have let Mujahideen forces in on during Operation Cyclone, in order to control Kevin. There's no hard evidence of this being the case, but come on, put 2 and 5 together. However, the most revelatory piece of evidence supporting this theory is when Kevin inexplicably decides to travel downtown to see the town's Santa Claus portrayer. While it may at first appear to be an innocent childlike endeavor, upon discovering the secretly encoded message Kevin passes off to Santa Claus, if that really is his true name, it is probable that this man is Kevin's contact, to whom he is relaying said message, perhaps even subconsciously.
I'm Kevin McCallister, 671 Lincoln Boulevard. Would you please tell him that instead of presents this year, I just want my family back. Peter, Kate, Buzz, Megan, Linny, and Jeff. And if he has time, my Uncle Frank.
Stick that shit into Google and add 9/11 after. Top result? Well, would you look at that? Following meeting his contact, Kevin seems to momentarily break free from his mental conditioning and seek solace at the Catholic Church, but old man Marley is able to distract Kevin long enough for his conditioning to take over. Upon returning home, Kevin, now fully activated, wreaks havoc on the unsuspecting wet bandits. In actuality, covert CIA operatives who have been tasked with retrieving sensitive documents from Peter's office in order to circumvent future terrorist attacks. Kevin is able to use his guerrilla warfare training to, once again, possibly subconsciously, protect the interests of bin Laden and his organization, which in turn leads to his handlers deciding he is ready to be prepped for his first major assignment. And thus, they release old man Marley's granddaughter, making Kevin his father's new watchdog, in preparation for what is to come. We pick up a year later, where we see despite the fact that he seemed to have a change of heart following his family returning, the severity of Kevin's programming has resulted in him once again displaying aggressive behavior and antisocial tendencies. It is also apparent that despite Peter McCallister not initially wanting his son to be involved with his employers, by the time next Christmas rolls around, the choice is out of his hands, as, for reasons that will be made clear soon, it is evident that Peter is being forced to aid and abet his son in orchestrating a terrorist attack on the city of New York. Kevin prepares for his trip to New York by recording the necessary information on his Talkboy, which is later shown to have a voice modulation feature that was only made available in April of 1993, several months after his trip to New York. Thus, how could Kevin have possibly acquired such a sophisticated device if it had not been supplied to him by a higher authority? Not convinced? Remember that covert code Kevin passed off to Al-Qaeda Santa Claus a year prior? Stick that shit into Google and type plane after it, you get a link for a seemingly innocent model of a Blue Angels F-11 F-1 Tiger airplane. And what is the company name that developed the Talkboy? It all just keeps adding up, huh? Peter, against his will of course, is tasked with ensuring that Kevin successfully makes it to New York. His first step is to purposely turn off his alarm clock, ensuring the family will be late arriving at the airport. The chaos of them getting to the gate being a perfect cover for his and Kevin's scheme. Peter accidentally hands his bag to Kevin, which of course contains the funds and documentation Kevin will need to complete his objective. As they make their way to the gate, Peter and Kevin purposely lag behind, allowing a second Al-Qaeda operative, wearing the exact same outfit as Peter, what a coincidence, to lead Kevin to the correct departure gate, while also giving Kevin and Peter plausible deniability, on the chance the CIA began looking into security footage at O'Hare Airport. Kevin expertly distracts the flight attendant and plays it off by using his boyish charm. And of course, upon boarding, there just so happens to be an empty seat. What happened to the passenger? I suppose we will find that out right around the same time we discover who was on that fucking grassy knoll. Upon arriving in New York, Kevin wastes no time in acquiring the necessary supplies and scoping out potential targets, before settling on the World Trade Center, planning the explosives he acquired at the base of the tower before hitting his rendezvous point at the Plaza Hotel. Ironically, despite its seemingly nefarious nature, Kevin's run-in with business mogul and future US President Donald Trump was a complete and utter unrelated coincidence. Meanwhile, little does Kevin know that operatives Merchants and Lime were busted out of prison by the CIA to pursue Kevin in New York, and the CIA also, months prior, had planted another operative as a concierge at the Plaza Hotel, having been expecting his arrival. But despite the best efforts of the operatives, Kevin is able to evade capture. The next day, Kevin is brought to his contact at Duncan's toy chest. Note the Santa on the front of the store? Just a coincidence, my ass. Kevin meets with his contact, Mr. Duncan, who runs the toy store as a front for a slush fund used to finance terrorism, specifically Kevin's scheme. Duncan hands Kevin the turtle doves, signifying Kevin's loyalty to the organization. Despite his mission being an apparent success, this is where things begin to go wrong. Kevin arrives at the final rendezvous point, his Uncle Rob's New York home, to meet with a fellow operative for its exfiltration from the United States, but the operative doesn't show, his fate a mystery even to this day. Peter stalls as much as he can Miami, but eventually Kevin's mother forces them to travel to New York. In addition, operatives Merchants and Lime discover the front stash of Duncan's and plan to disrupt the operation in order to circumvent the upcoming attack. Dismayed, Kevin absconds into Central Park, where he's met by his new Al-Qaeda overseer, Pigeon Lady, who takes him to her covert hideout above Carnegie Hall. However, it is apparent Pigeon Lady has seemingly regretted her time spent as an agent for the terrorist cell and urges Kevin to perhaps reconsider if he is willing to flee the country and his family to take a top-tier position in the organization. Despite his apparent change of heart, Kevin is unable to resist his programming and foils the attempt by operatives Merchants and Lime to circumvent his plot, eventually getting them arrested once again. The next morning, Kevin, having proven his loyalty to the organization, is released from his duty, this being communicated via the turtle doves. Kevin Kevin thanks the Pigeon Lady for showing him the light and is allowed to stay in the States with his family, despite living with the knowledge that his orchestration would go on to result in one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in the history of the United States. Despite Kevin's eventual change of heart and regret for his actions, the damage he has done to the fabric of this nation cannot be erased, and he must be brought to justice. And I will acknowledge that I am not absolved from blame, as I have sat on this knowledge for my entire life, allowing Al-Qaeda to indoctrinate other child operatives that are still out there waiting to strike. I even have my suspicions that U.S. federal law enforcement, including the CIA and FBI, have known about this for years, even going so far as to make up that absurd crackpot theory that Kevin grew up to be John Kramer, aka Jigsaw, from the Saw horror franchise. How ridiculous. John Kramer is a fictional character. This is clearly an attempt to obfuscate the truth. I can only hope that this video will bring the truth to light, highlight the patriotism of some of US history's true unsung heroes, and ensure that never again will... FBI, oh, fuck!